Hey folks, Barry here, Gateway Gamer, runs through, and it's the channel. Jen's not here, she's not here today. But she will be here later on for the playthrough of today's game. Now today we are going to be doing Star Wars Imperial-Assault. Okay. Now Imperial-Assault is a game for 2 to 5 players. There's 2 different modes. There's a skirmish mode, which we will not touch in this series of videos coming up. I might do a solo run through of them, I haven't decided yet. And then there is the campaign mode, which this video series will focus on. And then in the campaigns, players will either be rebel players or one player will be the Imperial player. And basically the Imperial player is trying to stop the rebel players from finishing certain tasks in the campaign or just having them run out of time throughout a campaign. Mission, and if you're the rebel players, you're trying to finish these tasks before time runs out in these missions. There's many different missions in the game. There's side missions that can relate to individual characters in the game. There's story missions that are kind of the overall arc of the campaign. There's force missions which the Imperial player can play to try and give themselves a little bit of a benefit. So this is going to show the basic introduction to this campaign. There's 15-ish missions in each campaign. And we'll go from there. So, one thing to note is that when you first start off your campaign, like I said, one player is going to be the Imperial player. The other players are going to be the heroes, okay? The rebel players. When you're choosing a rebel player, you want to be kind of careful which rebel player character you're going to choose, because you're going to be stuck with that character throughout the entire mission. Alright, so enough about this. Let's get into the game. Let's go to the table and we'll take it from there. First, we'll start with the rebel players. Each player will then choose one of the rebel characters. Okay, now the base game comes with 6 of these characters. Okay, and each player will choose one of these characters. Alright, so Jen will be playing 2 players. There are 2 characters in the game. That's what you do in a 2-player setup. Now, each of these rebel characters also has a deployment card, okay, which matches the rebel players. The deployment cards are not used in the campaign, just the player mats. Alright, so you give the rebel player their character player mat, or mats in this case. Okay, return any unused mats to the box, they won't be used. Along with these deployment cards. Again, these are used in the skirmish, they're not used for the campaign, so just return them to the box. We'll also give each rebel player their character class deck, okay, which has their character picture on them, on the back of the deck. When the player receives this deck, they're going to search through the deck and find the item card that does not have an experience point cost on the bottom left of the card. Okay, this will be their starting items. And we also give each player their figure. Okay. Next, we're going to build the side mission deck for the rebels. Okay, now the side mission deck is made up of 3 different sets of cards. Okay, we had the red ones, which represent side missions for each individual character. Okay, backstory missions, basically. Then we had the gray ones, which will give you a reward at the end of the campaign. The side mission if you win this side mission. Okay, and then we have the green ones, which will give you allies. Now, the base game has the 6 characters, 4 of the gray cards and 4 of the green cards. Okay, but it also comes with the Luke Skywalker pack, which comes with one of these gray side mission cards. Okay, if you choose to use that, you would remove one of the gray side mission cards and replace it with the one from Luke Skywalker's mission pack. And with additional packs, you would do the same thing. You would remove one card for the color of the card that you are replacing it with. Now, to build the deck, what we'll do is we'll find our character cards. Okay, so we have one card for Jin and one card for Chewie's cousin there. Okay, Then we add 4 of the gray cards. And again, if you're going to include the card from this Luke Skywalker pack, you would remove 1 gray card, replacing it with the Skywalker card. Okay, stack that on top of the red ones, and then the 4 green cards. Okay, and then you would give these cards a shuffle. You would place that out within easy reach of the rebel players, and you would return any unused side mission cards to the box. They won't be used. Okay, and then the rebel players will draw 2 of these side mission cards, and they will be the active mission cards for the campaign. Alright, so after they've done the first mission, the introduction mission, Aftermath, which we'll be playing, they would then select one of these 2 side missions to do, and then they would follow through with that mission. We're just going to put this off camera for now. Save room. It's kind of a big game. Okay, next the Imperial player will set up their character class cards here. Okay, now the Imperial player will choose one of these 3 different class card decks. Okay, we have Military Might here, and then we have Technological Superiority here, and finally we have Subversive Tactics here. Now the Imperial player will choose one of these 3 decks. I'm going to choose the Military Might deck here. Okay, we'll return the other 2 decks to the box. They won't be used for the game. Okay, so once we have figured out which class deck we're going to use, we will then search through the class deck and find the class card without an XP point on it, just like the rebel players did. Okay, this will be our starting item card for that class deck. Okay, now you don't have to shuffle these class decks because you'll be able to gain different items in the class deck at the end of the campaign. Alright, so once you do that, the Imperial player will place the class deck and the class deck item card that they're going to start off with in their player area. Okay, and then the Imperial player will set up their agenda deck. Now, the base game for Imperial-Assault comes with 6 sets of agenda deck cards. Okay, and each set has 3 cards in them. Alright, now if you're just playing the base game, you would shuffle all 18 of these cards together. Okay, form one agenda pile. The Darth Vader pack comes with 3 additional cards for the agenda deck. Okay, if you're going to use the Darth Vader pack in the game, you would remove 1 set of the 3 cards. Okay, and the name for each set is up here in the top right corner of the card. You would remove 1 set, replace it with the Darth Vader set, and then simply pile each set on top of each other, give the cards a shuffle, and then place that pile of cards in your play area. Okay, returning any unused sets to the box. They will not be used. I'm going to place this deck off to the side. The Imperial player does not look at these at the end of the campaign during the rewards. If he gains influence, he can choose to draw a certain amount of cards and look at it. And again, we'll get into all that later on. This is the rewards deck. Okay, we're going to place this out near the rebel players. Okay, but before we do that, we're actually going to look through it for a 2 or 3 player game. And for a 3-player game, we're going to find the heroic card. And for a 2-player game, we're going to find the legendary card. Okay, this will scale the player count up and down. Okay, make it a little more fair for the rebel players. Okay, since we're playing with the 2-player game, we're going to return the heroic card back to the rewards deck. You don't have to shuffle it. Again, this is something that you use after the campaign is over. Okay, and then we're going to give each of our rebel players one of these legendary cards, which allows each player to take 2 activation markers instead of just 1. Normally it is 1, but with the legendary it is 2, which means they will be able to go twice each round instead of just once. Okay, and it'll also give them an additional 10 life points, and we'll get into that when we get into the overview. Okay, to set the map, we're going to look at the campaign guide. Okay, and we're going to turn to page 4 for the introduction campaign, Aftermath. Okay, and here we'll see a picture of the map, and down on the bottom of the page we'll see numbers that represents the tiles. Okay, if we look at the tiles, there's an A and a B side to them. Okay, and we simply look down here at the bottom of the page, find those tiles. Okay, and then we set up the map like it looks in the picture. Okay, and then we'll place any tokens that are necessary. Okay, now there's 3 different types of tokens that you would use in Imperial Assault during missions. We have terminals here, okay, and they have a regular neutral side, and then if we flip them over, they have a colored side. There's 4 colors. There's red, yellow, green, and blue. Okay, and this is the same with all of the tokens that you would use on the maps. Okay, and we just simply place them in the spot dictated by the campaign guide. Okay, same with these crate tokens. And again, one side is neutral, one side has a color. There are also these campaign mission tokens here, okay, which are not used in Aftermath, but may be used throughout other campaign missions, okay, and they're the same as regular tokens, with the exception that they have a neutral, which has one of the 4 colors on the back of them, and they also have an Imperial on the Rebel side, which has different colors indicated by the border of the token. Okay, we're also going to look in the campaign for this symbol here, which represents doors, okay, which are on these standees, and we're going to place that in the appropriate space. Okay, finally we're going to place the entry point token, which is for the rebel players, in the appropriate space dictated by the campaign guide. Okay, once we do that, the rebel players will take their rebel figures and place them in any adjacent area to that token, and including on top of the token. Okay, and adjacent is orthogonal or diagonal in the case of Imperial Assault. Heroes would also place any allies in the spaces adjacent to this token. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is this campaign guide is supposed to be kept secret from the rebel players. Only Imperial player is supposed to look at this. Okay. Next, the Imperial player will take their threat and round dial here and set the round to 1 and the threat to 0. Okay, put it close to them where they can have easy access to it. We'll go into the deployment. We already did the rebel players. Now we'll do the Imperial players. Again, we'll take a look at the campaign guide there, and there is a box next to the picture of the map that you are going to set up, and that'll tell you your deployment and setup instructions. Now, there's 3 different types of deployment groups in this deployment and setup box. We have our initial deployment, our reserve groups, and then our open groups. Now, for the initial group, we will select the figures and the deployment cards for each of these figures dictated by the campaign guide, okay, which has a picture of each different group on the map. Okay, it actually has a picture where you're supposed to set each figure on the map. Okay, now if we look at the deployment cards, we'll see this bar underneath, which represents how many units are controlled by that deployment card. So in the case of the Imperial officer here, we have 1 bar, we set out 1 figure. In case of the stormtroopers here, we have 3 bars, so we'll set out 3 figures. Now, I've painted these. Normally, as you can see on the bottom, they're just this light gray color. I've painted them because of, I got a lot of time on my hands basically, but if you are controlling more than 1 unit of a specific type of character, okay, as such with the stormtroopers, there's several different deployment cards. There's 3 of them, 9 figures. What you would do is take these stickers and take one of these stickers off and place it on the base of the deployment group, and then one of the matching tokens and place it on the deployment card. I didn't really get into that idea, so what I did is I painted the base of a group of figures, okay, and I'll be able to tell which unit belongs to which deployment card. Okay, another note is if a deployment group in the book is in red font, in the red wording, you would use, they're called elite deployment cards for that, which are these ones with the red borders. Okay, so once we've gotten the initial group, we got their deployment cards and their figures, we'll look at the manual, see where to place them on the board. Okay, then to put their deployment cards out in the player area of the Imperial player. Okay, and then we will get the reserved cards for the Imperial player. Okay, now depends on which campaign you're using, which cards they are. But we're going to get their deployment cards and keep them secret. Put them face down in our play area. Alright. Okay, and then finally we have the open groups. With the open groups, the Imperial player can choose a number of additional units, depending on the campaign and how many open groups are allowed to use in further deployments. Okay, now these aren't laid out or placed face down. They're actually kept in what's called their hand. Alright, so the other player does not see what they are, but throughout the campaign, throughout the mission, they can deploy these open groups with the cost of threat indicated up here in the top left of the deployment card. Okay, and threat is gained on the dial, and we'll get into that a little later on. Okay, now the Aftermath mission doesn't have any open groups, so we will not worry about them in this video. Now there's also special setup instructions for the mission listed in this box. Aftermath doesn't have it, it's just the introduction campaign, but later on in different missions you may have special setup rules listed in this box. Okay, next we're going to place the condition cards along with their tokens out. Okay, so we have stunned, focus, and bleeding down here. Now these can be placed face up. There are conditions that can be acquired through either special abilities or certain effects throughout the game. Okay, we're also going to place out these strain and damage tokens. Okay, now the damage tokens come in a value of 1 or 5. I just separated them. We're also going to place our supply cards out. Okay, now the supply cards correspond with these crate tokens. Whenever a player interacts with a crate, they would take the token and a supply card indicating what's in that crate. We're going to place our story mission deck off to the side. We won't need it during the campaign, but afterwards. Okay, you don't have to shuffle that. Okay, next we're going to take our item cards. Okay, now there's 3 sets of these item cards. There's tier 1, 2, and 3. Okay, you can set all 3 out. They won't be used till the end of the mission, okay, during the rewards section. I just take out the deck of item cards that correspond with the mission that I'm playing. And if you look on the back of the campaign manual, you will see a listing there of what tier to draw item cards from. I only take that deck out, and then I'm going to put it off to the side like I've done, just to save room. Again, they won't be used to the end of the game. Next, we're going to put out our defense dice along with our attack dice. Okay, put them within easy reach, everybody. These are like player reference cards for certain keywords. You could, keep them close if you want to. Okay, the final thing we're going to do is the Imperial player will read the mission briefing to the Rebel players, and you are ready to play Imperial Assault campaign mode. Okay, folks, here we go with Imperial Assault. Now, the object of Imperial Assault depends on the missions in the campaign mode. Okay, they vary mission to mission, and the outcome will be different for the Rebel players and the Imperial players. The ultimate goal of the campaign is to win the final mission, which is last one, which can be anywhere from 10 to like 15 missions down the road. In between, you will be playing side missions and story missions and maybe force missions, depending on the outcome of how the players react to certain conditions in the game and who wins certain missions in the game. Now, in Imperial Assault, players are either going to be the Imperial players or the Rebels, also known as heroes from here on out in the rulebook and also in this overview. And they're trying to accomplish a goal, and that goal depends on the mission that they're playing, found in the mission guide. Okay, now we will be doing the first mission, the introduction mission called Aftermath in the campaign guide here. There are several stages in the campaign, okay? First, there is the mission stage. Okay, now this doesn't happen in the introduction campaign, but from here on out, this will happen. Basically, what will happen is during setup, we made the side mission deck. Okay, the heroes here will choose one of these 2 side missions to play. Alright, if the campaign guide tells you to do a side mission. If we look on the back of the campaign guide, we will see that there are different slots on what types of mission you're going to do. It's either going to be a story mission or a campaign mission. Okay, so after the first mission here, when this is done, the next mission, the rebels will choose which of the 2 side missions that they want to do. Okay, when they do that, they'll put it out. They'll take the card out, give it to the Imperial player. He'll look up the side mission page, indicated down here on the bottom of the card, and then set the board up for that mission. If the book tells you to do a story mission, then you will do whatever mission that either the rebels or the Imperial players won during the last mission. Once the rebels choose an active mission, we will resolve a mission, whatever that mission is. In this case, it's the introduction mission, Aftermath. Okay, meaning we'll set up the board, play the mission until its finale, which is either the rebel players ran out of time dictated by rounds, or the rebel players completed whatever objective that the mission tells them to. Then after that, we'll get into post-mission cleanup. Okay, during that, rewards are giving out to either the rebels or the Imperial players, depending on who won the mission. Then we'll basically refresh everything. Okay, the heroes will lose any wounds and all that. Then we will go into the rebel upgrade stage, and then the Imperial upgrade stage, and then you start a new mission. There's 2 phases during each mission. Okay, there's the activation phase and the status phase. The rebel players will go first, and they'll choose which character they want to go. Choose to go first. Okay, and then they'll use these activation tokens here to denote that they went first. Now, in a 2-player game, each rebel player gets 2 activation markers indicated by this legendary item card used. Okay, that's only used when there are only 2 rebel characters. Now, when there are 3 rebel characters being used, players will use the heroic item card instead. Okay, in that case, each character, there will be 3 characters. Each character will only get 1 activation token, and then an additional activation token will be passed from character to character from one round to the next. Okay, and that's just to scale the game up a little bit for the rebel players. Okay, so during the activation period of the game, the activation phase of the game, the rebel players will choose one of their characters to activate, and they'll flip their activation token over to the red side, indicating that they've activated that character. Now, once the rebel players have activated their character, the heroes can choose to do 2 of any of the following actions in any order they wish to. Now, the actions are to move, attack, interact, rest, and then do their special action. Okay, so we'll start with move. Say Jin here decided to move. Okay, movement is an action. When you move, you get movement points, which each character card will dictate that. Okay, or in the case of the Imperial players, their deployment card. Okay, and that is indicated by the speed. So Jin here would have a speed of 5. She has 5 movement points. Okay, which is different than the movement action. Okay, here the probe droid has a speed of 3. The probe droid would be able to move 3 spaces, basically. They have 3 movement points. During the activation, you can move, like, let's say, 1 space, stop and do another action, and then continue to move using the rest of your movement points dictated by your speed. In the game, you can move orthogonally or diagonally, as long as you are a normal size figure like this, meaning you only take up 1 space at your base. There are larger figures, okay, that take up more than 1 space on the board. They have special restrictions, and we'll get into them in a little bit later on. A player can move their figure orthogonally or diagonally, like I said, as long as they do not come to an obstacle. Okay, there's a few obstacles in the game that are not able to be passed through, or make it a little more difficult to pass through. Okay, first we have these black areas here, which are walls. Okay, you cannot move through walls. You can move around them and stuff like that, but you cannot move through a wall. Okay. Also a door. You cannot move through a door. You have to interact with it. We'll get into that a little bit later on. Next we have the spaces with red lines. Okay, these are called block terrain. Okay, you cannot go through block terrain, or you cannot draw a line of sight through block terrain. And we'll get into that when we get to the combat stage a little bit later on, the attack stage. Okay, so if Jin wanted to get to this terminal here, she would have to move around this red line, but she can go diagonally across the corner of the red line. Another type of terrain that we have to worry about is dotted red lines, which is not used in this mission, but will be used in following missions. Okay, these are called impassable. You simply cannot move through them, but you can draw a line of sight through them. They're strictly used for movement restrictions. Okay, and the final type we have to worry about are these blue areas here. Okay, this is difficult terrain. It costs a figure 2 movement points to move through that instead of 1 like you normally would. Any figure on the same team can move through a space with another figure at no additional cost. However, if a figure were to move through another figure on the opposing side, they would have to spend 2 points for the space that the opponent is, and then another point for the space adjacent to them. They cannot end their movement in the same space as an opponent's figure. As you can see here, we have an opponent's figure right next to this outreached wall here. Okay, now the heroes can move diagonally from this space to this space without paying an additional cost to move to that space. Okay, they're squeezing through, basically. Now, it is not shown on this board, but say we had 2 types of terrains next to each other. Okay, like say we had a wall outreaching here from this red straight line here. We could not move diagonally from one space to the other through that. Now, let's get into larger figures. Okay, larger figure is any figure that space is greater than 1 space on the board. Okay, it's 2 or more. Large figures cannot move diagonally. Okay, and if a large figure were to turn, he would have to spend 1 movement point. Now, when they do rotate, they have to be in at least one of the spaces that they started with. Okay, so for this guy to rotate from here to here, the back portion of him is still in the space that he started in. Okay, now when a large figure is pushed, it cannot rotate. Okay, it must be in the same direction as it was when it was pushed. Now let's say a large figure was to move into a space with 2 opposing figures in it. Instead of paying 1 point per figure additionally, they would only have to spend 1 additional point. Okay, and again, large figures still abide by the terrain. Only mobile or massive figures can ignore terrain. Alright, one additional rule with larger figures is that when attacking, they can choose any point in any space that they are in to attack from. And when being attacked, the opposing player would have to choose 1 space that they occupy to attack, to draw their line of sight to. So that's basically movement. Spend your action for the movement. Again, movement points are different than the action for movement. You get points depending on the character's speed. Okay, and then you simply move the character that many spaces. Alright, now you can stop and do an action in between, like I said, and then continue to move. Additionally, heroes can spend strain tokens equal to their endurance to move 1 additional space, and you can do this up to 2 times per activation. Okay, so if this hero wanted to go 6 spaces instead of 5, she could strain herself, basically, giving her 1 more movement point, and then she could choose to strain herself again, giving her an additional movement point, up to 7. Okay, however, a hero cannot go above their endurance, which is for Jin 4 points. So say if Jin had 4 strain tokens on her already, she could not choose to take another strain to move an additional space, because that would go over her endurance level. Okay, but strain tokens are used for different things, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. Another action a figure can take is to attack. Okay, now any figure can do this, whether it be the Imperial figures or the Rebel figures. Okay, but only the hero figures can attack twice. Okay, the Imperial figures can only attack once per activation, and we'll get into the Imperial activation in a little bit. So, say Jin here decided not to move, instead she went to attack this Stormtrooper. Okay, now, the first thing she would do is look on her item cards here, that beginning item card that she received from her class deck, which shows her weapon. Now, there's two types of weapons. There is ranged weapons, as in the case with Jin, and then there is melee weapons, okay, which have the sword symbol. Now, to attack, the player would simply look at their weapon card, okay, whether it be an additional card or down here, as in the case with the Imperial players, it's just simply on the attack section of the card, and they would gather the dice that are dictated by that card. In case of Jin's vintage blaster here, it is 2 green dice. Okay, she would declare which opposing force she is targeting. Okay, in this case, the Stormtrooper here, and then that Stormtrooper would look down at their defense value on their card and roll the die indicated by the defense value. Okay, in this case, a black die. Okay, now the heroes also have a defense value, and that's indicated on their player mat. Okay, now both players will roll the dice simultaneously and then figure out the results. The first thing that the attacking player would be, in this case it's Jin, is figure out if she has ranged for a ranged weapon. Now, these numbers here represent what they call the accuracy. It's basically range in a sense. So she would count spaces 1, 2, 3 from her to the opposing figure. Here she only has 2, 1 and 1, so she would automatically miss that figure. Okay, she wasn't accurate enough to hit the figure. Okay. However, if a player rolls this lightning bolt symbol, a surge symbol, they may have additional abilities that they can add on to the attack through them symbols. As in the case with the vintage blaster, one of her surge abilities is to add +1 to the accuracy. So she could spend that one symbol to add an additional point of accuracy. So now she has 3. She will be able to hit the Stormtrooper. Next, we will check to see if Jin here has line of sight. In order to do this, the attacking figure, Jin, will draw an imaginary line from 1 point of the space that they are in to 2 points of the space that the opponent is, in this case, the Stormtrooper. Okay, so if we draw a line from here to here, we will be able to hit him. Again, from here to here, we will also be able to hit him. Okay, we can also do that from this corner, going from here to here, or even from a corner behind them, going through them. Okay, so like say from here to here, or here to here. Okay, in all 3 cases, Jin was able to attack the Stormtrooper, draw a line of sight for the Stormtrooper. Okay, now there's a couple other rules with line of sight. You cannot draw line of sight through walls, block terrain, that straight red line terrain, okay, doors, or non-targeted opponents. Okay, so say Jin was trying to hit this Stormtrooper here. Okay, say she were over here. Okay, she could not attack him because this guy blocks the line of sight to this guy. Okay, even though she technically could draw 2 lines to him if this first Stormtrooper wasn't there. Let's say this Stormtrooper wasn't there, you could skirt the corner of a space with a block terrain on it, such as this case with the wall. Okay, we could go from this point, skirt that corner, and go down to that point to hit the Stormtrooper, and then again from here to here. You could even hide behind a wall and hit the Stormtrooper, okay? Because we could draw a line from here to here and here to here. Okay, that wall does not block line of sight for Jin. But on the reverse, it does block line of sight for the Stormtrooper. You cannot draw 2 lines to Jin. And then additionally, as with the terrain, if there was like 2 block terrains on a diagonal, you cannot draw a line of sight through that. So let's get back to the attack. Okay, so now that we know that Jin has the range indicated by these numbers and the surge that she used, we know she has line of sight. Now we would add up any damage on her dice and compare them with any blocks on the opponent's die. Okay, so this symbol is a block. This symbol is a damage. This symbol is a surge. Okay. In this case, Jin would hit the Stormtrooper once, but the Stormtrooper blocked it. Now she used a 1 surge symbol for an increase in her accuracy. She can use another surge symbol for another damage. Okay? Because she has that on her Vintage Blaster card here. Okay? You can use as many surge symbols as you want to, but you can only use 1 surge symbol for 1 ability. Cannot use 1 ability and then use 1 surge to do it once and then another surge to do it again. So she now has a Stormtrooper twice, once for the damage symbol, once for the surge symbol. The Stormtrooper blocked 1 of the damages done, so she would now just simply hit him once. We would take a damage token of a 1 value and place it near the Stormtrooper. You're actually supposed to do it on the Stormtrooper's base. I find that kind of fiddly, so I just place it near them. Okay, now if it were the heroes being attacked, you would simply place an attack token on their player mat. Additionally, there are a couple other symbols on the defense dice. Okay, there's this symbol here, which will cancel out 1 surge attack. Okay, and then only on the white die, there's the dodge here, which will cancel out the attack altogether. Okay. There's also a blank side on the white die, which means that the defender got screwed. He's going to take whatever is given to him. He's not going to be able to block it or anything else. Okay. And then there's combinations of symbols. Like here, it would cancel out 1 surge and then block 1 point of damage. We talked about the strain tokens a little bit. Additionally, the hero, if they roll a surge token, a surge symbol on their dice, they can heal 1 token of strain. Okay? Now they can only do this once per activation. Alright, if they were wounded at some point in the game, okay, and they did not have any strain, then they could use that surge to heal 1 damage. And again, you can only do this once per activation. That's what Jen did. She attacked the Stormtrooper here. She could choose to attack him again. And again, only the Rebel players, the hero players, can do an attack twice. The Imperial players can only attack once. Okay, melee attacking is a little different. Okay, say we activated Garakan here. Okay, and we flipped over his activation token. We decide to move him. Okay, so we look at the speed, it's 4. We go 1, 2. Now we are adjacent to the Imperial figure. With the melee attack, you have to be adjacent to the opposing figure. Okay. Then the attacker, which is the figure that moved into the attack or initiated the attack, would look at their either deployment sheet if you're an Imperial player or weapons card if you are a heroes, and see which dice to roll. In his case, it's 1 red and 1 yellow. The defender will see what color die they need. Okay, in the case of the Stormtrooper, it's a black one again. Okay, again, both players will roll the dice simultaneously, and this is due to some effects that may happen. Okay, and then you figure out who made it ahead. Okay, now with a melee attack, you ignore the accuracy number. You go simply into the damage, strain, and block numbers, or the dodge. Okay, so here Garakan did 3 points of damage. The Stormtrooper blocked 2 of them. The Stormtrooper will get 1 point of damage. Okay, but if we look at his vibroaxe here, which is his weapon, there's a couple key words here: pierce 1 or cleave 1. Okay. I'll explain those a little bit later on, but for now we are going to focus on the Pierce one here. Okay, if he uses a surge symbol to activate that Pierce ability, basically what he can do is cancel out one of the block symbols on the defender's dice. Okay, and that will give him 3 damage to 1 block, giving him 2 damage to the figure. Okay, so we would place 2 damage markers on the figure. In case of the Imperial player, again, with the heroes, you would place the token on their sheets. Okay, and then you would move on. However, in the case of the Stormtrooper here, if we look at his health, it is 3. Anytime a figure takes damage equal to his health or greater than his health, that figure is killed off and removed from the board, along with any damage markers that were given to him. Okay, for the Imperial players. For the heroes, it's a little different. Whenever you reach the health of a hero, instead of being removed from the board, the hero simply flipped over and is considered wounded. And basically what that means is some of their special abilities are knocked down and their endurance is a little less, stuff like that. Their speed, some traits of theirs are lowered. Okay, if the hero ever gets wounds up to the health again while he is wounded, then he or she is removed from the game. Okay, another action a hero can take is interact. Okay, now there's several objects in the game that heroes can interact with. The Imperial player can also interact with some of them. Some of them are dictated by the campaign or the mission, whether they can interact with them or not. Imperial players cannot interact with crates, and I'll explain what the crates do in a second. Okay, but heroes can interact with crates, and basically what they would do is they would have to be adjacent to the crate. They would take the crate token, place it on their player mat, and at the end of the mission they will gain credits for every crate that is on their player mat. And then they would take one of these supply cards and put it in their play area, and these supply cards do different things. Some of them give you additional credits at the end of the mission. Some of them give you weapons or one-time uses, different things depending on the different supply card that you draw. If a figure interacts with a terminal, different things can happen. Okay, sometimes they will trigger some other effect in the mission. Sometimes you have to destroy them depending on the mission. They vary from mission to mission. Okay, and they work a little differently in the skirmish game, but again, this focuses on the campaign. There are also these mission tokens, and the effects of them vary from mission to mission. Again, the mission guide will tell you what the effects of interacting with these mission tokens are. Okay, and then again, some of them are for the rebel players. Sometimes it's the Imperial player who's going to interact with them. Sometimes they're neutral, and either player can interact with them. Okay, and then we have doors. Now, normally when a figure interacts with the door is removed from the board, and they can gain access to another section of the board. In certain missions, you have to do a skill test in order to open the door. Okay, and the skill test is dictated down here on the player mat. These symbols down here, and we'll get into them a little bit later on. The next action we have is the rest action. Okay, now only heroes can rest. Imperial players cannot rest, but throughout the game, through either game effects or special abilities by the heroes, they will gain these strain tokens, and then if they exceed their endurance number, like I said before, they would then take damage tokens. Okay, if a hero decides to rest, they can remove strain tokens equal to their endurance. Okay, so in this case, this hero has an endurance of 4. She can remove the 4 strain tokens that she has on her player mat. Okay, now, if the hero has less strain than her endurance, then she can start taking away damage tokens. Okay, so again, here she has an endurance of 4. She chooses the rest. She would remove these 2 strain tokens, okay, which would leave her with 2 additional points of rest. Okay, and in that case, she can remove a strain token, okay, or a damage token. 1 token for each point of endurance that she has remaining after removing the strain. Okay, and if she did not have any strain but she had damage, then she can remove 4 damage tokens instead of strain. Now the final action a player can take is their special action, okay, which is indicated here by this arrow looking symbol. Now to use that ability, whether it be on a player mat or certain cards throughout the game, certain class cards or supply cards, the player would have to spend 1 action in order to use that card, and then either exhaust or discard the card depending on what the card is. Okay, so they are the basic actions. Additionally, figures have special abilities, whether it be the heroes or the imperial players, and they'll be listed on their either character sheet or on their deployment cards. Now this is basically the game flow. Once a hero does their activation, then the imperial player will do an activation. Okay, it's the same thing as the heroes, with the exception that instead of just controlling 1 figure, depending on the deployment card, the imperial player can control up to 3 figures. Okay, and this is dictated by these lines below the deployment cost. Okay, so the stormtroopers always have 3 figures per unit. Okay, 1, 2, and then the one that we killed off, 3. In order for the imperial player to activate a figure, they would exhaust the card, turn it sideways, okay, and then they would activate each figure individually. Okay, so say this stormtrooper here decided to move and attack. He has a speed of 4. He would go 1, 2, and then let's say he attacked Jin here. They'd roll the dice, resolve the combat, and then he's a chicken, so he'd spend the additional 2 speed points to move away. Then once his activation is done, he would move on to the next one, and then you'd move on to the next one. You always complete 1 figure's activation before moving on to the next one. Okay, and then it would move on back to the heroes, and they would activate another hero figure, and then so forth until all of the deployment cards have been exhausted and all of the heroes' activation tokens have been flipped. Okay, and again, in a 2-player game, each hero has 2 activations instead of just 1. Okay, when you're done that, you would then move into the status phase. Okay, now during the status phase, the imperial player will take their round threat dial here. They will move the threat dial, and that depends on which mission you are on. If we take a look at the back of the mission campaign guide, we will see different threat numbers for the different missions. Okay, now with the first one it's 2, and then it goes up 3, 4, and so on. Next we will do the ready phase, which means any exhausted cards will be flipped back up to use again. Okay, in the case of the stormtroopers, it would be their deployment cards. In the case of the heroes here, it would be any cards that they exhausted, and then all the activation markers would be flipped over to the green side. Okay, next we would go into deployment and reinforce phase. Okay, and this is only for the imperial players. Now, on each deployment card, there are either 1 or 2 numbers in the top left corner. Okay, depends on the group. Okay, so here with the probe droid, there's only 1. That's the deployment cost. Okay, it costs that much to deploy that group. The stormtroopers here, however, have 2 numbers. They have the 6 and a 2. Okay, now the 6 corresponds with the deployment. That's how much it costs to deploy an entire group. The 2 represents a reinforced cost. Okay, so say one of these stormtroopers was killed off earlier in the game. The imperial player could take their dial and move it down 2, okay, and then redeploy one of these stormtroopers. Okay, now if we look at the campaign guide for the mission that we are on, it will tell us where we can deploy these groups. Okay, and that's indicated by this green crosshair looking thing. Okay, so in the case of this mission, we could deploy them here, or any adjacent spot to it if that one was taken. Now there are other colored deployment symbols on our sheet. Okay, they're used for later effects most of the time for, the reinforcement groups. Alright, usually when you're deploying or reinforcing, you're going to use the green ones. Okay, now additionally, say this droid was killed off at some point in the game. Okay, there's only one unit for the droid, so the Imperial player would take that droid and put him back in his hand. Okay, and then later on in the game, if he had enough threat to cover the cost, in this case 3, he could redeploy the droid again on or adjacent to the deployment spot. Now with the reserve groups here, they work a little different. To deploy these does not cost you any threat. Okay, you simply just deploy them on the board. Depending on what the campaign guide tells you is where you would deploy them on the board and at what time during the mission you would deploy them. Now those open groups I talked about briefly during setup, they're the same thing. In this mission there are no open groups, but in other missions you can take additional deployment cards and place them in your hand, and then during this phase in the game you can deploy those open groups onto the board, whether they be villains or just regular forces here. Okay, and again, the campaign guide will tell you any restrictions on that. Okay, next there's the end of round effects. This is dictated by the mission guide. Okay, so if the mission says something happens, then you do whatever the mission guide tells you to do. Okay, and the final thing is to take your round dial here and then move it to the next round. Okay, and that is the status phase. Okay, and this will continue until whatever the mission guide tells you. Okay, usually the heroes have to achieve something on the board, blow up certain number of tokens or figures or something before the end of a certain round. The Imperial players trying to prevent them from doing so. Okay, stuff like that. It'll continue until whatever the goal of the mission has happened or failed to happen. Okay, now once that happens, if the Imperial player that at some point in time bought a forced mission out of the agenda deck, players would automatically go right into that forced mission if the Imperial player bought it and played it. Okay, if not, then you would go into the post-mission cleanup phase. Okay, basically what you do there is the heroes will recover all wounds and strains. They will get rid of those. Okay, if a hero is wounded, okay, again, we're on the other side of the card. If the hero is wounded, you would flip it back to their normal phase, their normal side here. Next, the heroes would take their supply card here. Okay, and if they did not give them any credits or experience points, stuff like that, they would simply just shuffle them back into the supply deck. If they did give them credits, then they would keep account of that, noted on the back of the campaign guide that they got so many credits for that card. Next, the heroes will discard their crate tokens, and they get 50 credits for each crate token that they have on their player sheet. They would return the current mission card to the box. Okay, the introduction mission doesn't have a card, but later on in the game, the players will either play one of these story missions, one of these side missions, or like I said, one of these forced missions. Okay, they return that card to the box. Like I said in the beginning, the players chose one of these side missions to do. Okay, they would then draw up so that they have two side missions. If the rebels have two side missions already in play, okay, and they did one of these story missions, then they would just simply skip that. Now that we did the post mission cleanup, we will now go into the rebel reward part of the game. Okay, throughout the campaign, the rebel players will collect credits and experience points. Now for the credits, players will go through this tier deck, and that depends on which stage of the campaign you are. Okay, in the introduction campaign at the end will be on tier 1, and they could go through the tier deck here and spend credits as a group to purchase these items in that tier deck. Okay, so say they had 300 credits at the end of the mission. One player could buy this armored gauntlet here. Okay, and then they would place that with their character and then use it for the rest of the campaign. Okay, and then the other player can spend credits for another card if they had credits. Okay, now they do not have to spend all their credits at one time. They can accumulate them throughout the campaign. It depends on the group as a whole, and again, the credits are pooled as a whole for the rebel players. All right, and then they can spend experience on their class deck. Okay, each card in the class deck has a cost of experience points down there in the lower left corner. That is individual to each hero. Okay, they would spend their experience points, take the card that they wish to purchase, and place it with their hero. That'll continue throughout the campaign, same as with the item cards. Once that's done, we'll move into the Imperial players upgrade phase of the game. Okay, it works similar to the Rebels, with the difference that instead of spending credits, the Imperial player will spend influence. Okay, in which case they can purchase cards from their agenda deck here. Okay, now the agenda cards vary depending on card to card. They have a cost of the influence down on the lower left. Okay, some of these are an ongoing effect card, like you can play an additional stormtrooper at the deployment stage at the beginning of each campaign, stuff like that. Some of them are one-shots. If you discard the card, you could do whatever, kill off something. Okay, and then some of them are those forced agenda cards, like I said. And then the Imperial player can spend their experience points on their class deck, same as the heroes, buying different cards that they will keep with them throughout the game. Okay, now I'm going to clean up a little bit, and then we're going to go into some of the keywords that are used throughout the game. Okay, I glazed by allies briefly during the setup, but basically what will happen is an ally has the square next to their name. Okay, and if it is a rebel ally, it's called an ally. If it is an imperial ally, it's called a villain. Okay, now with the rebels, during the initial deployment, okay, when they place their figures on or adjacent to the entrance token, they can choose to place one of these allies on the board. Okay, now each ally comes with these tokens here, which correspond to the artwork of the ally card, the ally deployment card, and they simply place them somewhere around the entrance token like you would any other figure. Now, allies are controlled collectively as a whole by the rebel players. Okay, so they work just like any other rebel player figure on the board, with the exception that they cannot interact with crates, and they cannot rest, and they can only attack once. Alright, so during the activation part of the game, the rebel players can choose to activate one of the allies. They would place one of the strain tokens on it, indicating that it's active, and then they can do two actions like any normal hero. Okay, with the exception of the crates and resting, like I said, and the only one attack. Okay, after they finish out their activation, you would simply exhaust it like you would with an Imperial player deployment card, and that'll be that. However, once an ally is defeated, okay, their health is exceeded with tokens, or matched or exceeded with tokens, they are removed from the game completely and they cannot be deployed. The Imperial player has the opportunity to increase his threat by the number of the deployment points given to that ally. So in the case of Chewbacca here, he's worth 15 deployment points. The Imperial player can raise his threat to 15. Okay, and then the Imperial player can use those threat points to deploy an optional unit at the setup. Or he could hold on to them and then use them throughout the mission in the deployment phase of the game later on. Villains, the Imperial allies, work a little differently. Okay, in order to use them, if the mission says you gain this ally or whatever, you hold it in your hand, okay, which isn't your initial deployment or your reserve deployments. It's, held in your hand like your open deployment cards. And then throughout the game, you can spend deployment points. And during the deployment phase, you can place them on the board at the deployment points on the board. Okay, usually they're the green deployment points. The mission may specify that the rebels get a specific ally for that one mission. If that's the case, the Imperial player will not get the threat or the optional deployment, okay, for that ally. And then the rebels can choose to deploy one additional ally. Okay, normally you can only deploy one ally per mission, but if the mission dictates that a specific ally is used by the rebels, then they can deploy that ally plus the additional one ally that you would normally be able to deploy through a game. Okay, folks, let's talk a little bit about a tribute test. I think I actually called them skill test earlier on, or called it a tribute test. Okay, and basically what a tribute test is that a hero will have to roll dice and get a surge symbol in order to pass this tribute test. Now, they could be to interact with certain objects like the doors or the terminals or some kind of challenge that comes up through a campaign, and the campaign will tell you that you have to test the hero with one of three different attributes, and if they pass, an effect will happen, or if they fail, a certain effect will happen. Okay, now we have three different types of attributes. We have the strength, which is indicated by this fist symbol. We have insight, which is indicated by this eye symbol. And then we have tech, which is indicated by this horn symbol. Okay, and to pass it or fail in the tribute test, you would simply roll the dice that are indicated by the attribute that your character has, and they vary from character to character. You roll the dice, see if you get a surge symbol. If you get a surge symbol, you would pass. If you don't, you would fail. Now, this is the basic way of doing an attribute test. Some attribute tests, you would need to roll more than one success. Okay, and there will be a number indicated before the symbol in the campaign guide that'll tell you need to succeed this many times in order to pass this attribute test. Okay, and if, say, a hero goes to interact with the object and there's multiple successes that they need to pass this attribute test and they fail to do that. Okay, but they do roll, say, one success, then they would simply place one of these strength tokens near the object that they were interacting with. And then the next activation, say another hero came along, they could roll for the attribute test, and they would remove the strain token and then add a +1 success to whatever they would roll. Okay. So that's basically a tribute test. It varies from character to character what their strengths and weaknesses are in these attributes. And then, depending on the campaign, you may or may not have to do one of these attribute tests. Okay, let's get into some keywords here. Alright, now, first we have these condition tokens. Okay, as I demonstrated a little earlier, Chewie's cousin here has the ability to focus if he gains if he gains 3 wounds per attack. Okay, when a condition is met either by a game effect or a card effect, okay, you would take a token for the specific condition, place it on your player mat, and then also take the card which describes what the condition is. Okay, now there's 3 different conditions. There is stunned, focused, and bleeding. All of them have different effects. Now the stunned condition, it says you cannot attack or voluntarily exit your space. Okay. And you need to spend an action to discard it. It has that little arrow symbol on it. Okay, so if you're stunned, okay, say this stormtrooper here was stunned. Okay, this guy came up here and he just stopped in front of him. During the activation for that stormtrooper, he cannot move out of that space or attack him. So basically he's got to pass, you know. Only way he would be able to move is if he was pushed, which is another keyword, and we'll get into that a little later on. Okay, focus. If you have the focus token on your player mat there, or on one of the figures of your Imperial player, then basically what you'll do is be able to roll an additional green die during your next activation. Okay, during the attack in your next activation. You can also use this for attribute tests. Alright, once you've passed the attribute test or used it for battle, then you would discard the die along with the card and the token. Okay, now we have bleeding, okay, which means some game effect will trigger you to start bleeding, you know. During your activation, if you choose an action other than whatever the game effect says, lists, okay, you would gain 1 string, okay, and this will accumulate round after round until you discard the card if you use the actions other than what is specified. Okay, and then in order to discard the bleeding condition, you'd have to spend an action. Okay, so mobile means that a figure with mobile, such as the probe droid here, can move through or end their space in difficult terrain, the blue areas, block terrain, the red straight-lined areas, or impassable terrain, that terrain with the red dotted lines. Okay, and they can also move through spaces with opposing figures at no extra cost. Okay, so with the difficult terrain, instead of spending 2 action points to move through it, they only spend 1. If he were like here, he could move across Garrican here for 2 movement points instead of 3. Remember, when you move through a space with an opposing player, a character, you have to spend 2 movement points. If you're mobile, you would ignore that and only spend 1 movement point to go through that space. Also, in some missions on the tiles, the block terrain is a square. Okay, it's 1 whole space. Mobile units can stop in those block terrain and the impassable terrain spaces if it's in that case one whole space. Okay, and the blocked terrain does not affect line of sight for a mobile unit. Okay, some figures have the massive keyword to them, such as General Weiss here. Okay, now massive means that, you know, the player is pretty big. Okay, along with the movement rules that apply to mobile, massive figures have a couple additional movement rules. Okay, first off, a massive figure cannot be on interior spaces. Okay, now in the rule book it tells you what tiles these are. Basically, you know, if you look, this looks like it's interior. Anything with grass and trees on it is exterior. Okay, pretty easy. They cannot enter a space containing another massive figure. Now in the base game, there's only this one and then the big guy here. Yeah, he's not done getting painted yet, but working on it. Alright, so those two cannot be in the same space. Okay, now massive figures can end their movement in a space containing either friendly or hostile units. And then they would push those units to an open space. Okay, we'll get into push in a minute. Okay, but if a massive figure does that and pushes another figure out of that space, they would immediately stop their movement. Okay, now what pushing means is that a figure is pushed out of their space, okay, and it could be in any direction. It doesn't have to be retreating. It could be, instead of the stormtrooper being pushed this way, he could have been pushed this way. Okay. Now, when a massive figure pushes another figure, they would first push friendly figures and then opposing figures. Alright? But remember I said that when a figure is stunned, it could be moved by being pushed. Okay? Being pushed is not a voluntary movement. You're being moved, forced to move by another figure. Okay? So, in this case, if this Imperial Trooper was stunned, normally he couldn't voluntarily move, but if he was pushed by one of these massive figures, then, he's moving involuntarily. Okay, now when another figure is pushed, it doesn't cost any movement points to that figure, so the Stormtrooper wouldn't have to spend any points, nor would these guys if they were pushed, the rebel players. The massive figure was pushing a large figure, okay, which is any figure that takes up more than 2 spaces with their base. The large figure cannot move diagonally. It would have to move straight, either here or up here, but it would have to go here because these spaces are full. Okay, next keyword here is blast. Certain cards have the blast keyword on it, which means that you would cause damage to any figure around the space that you are in. Okay? And depending on the level of blast will depend on how much damage you're in. Okay, so say the Stormtrooper offhand had a card with blast on it, he would give 1 damage to each figure around him, including friendly figures. Okay? Now with massive figures, it works a little differently. When you target the blast at a massive figure, you have to target the space, okay, and then anything around the targeted space would get the damage. Now, any damage suffered by a blast cannot be blocked. Okay, if you roll in the defense die and you come up with a block symbol, a blast is not affected by that. The next keyword we have here is cleave, okay, which certain cards have, all right, such as the Vibro Axe here on Garrican's item card. Okay, basically what cleave means is when Garrick here targets an opposing figure, and that opposing figure receives 1 damage, then Garrick can choose another figure that he could target, and they would also receive a damage. Okay, now the damage received by the cleave is not affected by the block. Okay, so it ignores it, just like the blast does. Okay, and then if this cleave causes a condition to the player, okay, it's only to the targeted figure. It's not to the one that took the cleave damage. Okay. Okay, next we have the keyword pierce. Again, we'll use Garrican here. He has a pierce 1, which means that he will be able to ignore 1 block symbol. Okay, if he had a pierce 2, then he can ignore 2 block symbols by the opponent. Okay, by the defense die. Okay, if a block symbol is not rolled, then the pierce has no effect. And if they're using more than 1 pierce ability, then they would add up. So say if he had a pierce 1 on this card and another card he had a pierce 1, he could combine them to do a pierce 2. And finally we have reach. The reach ability allows figures to attack an opposing figure 2 spaces away with the melee attack. Okay, now in order to do this, they must have line of sight. Accuracy on the attack rolls doesn't matter. It's just like a normal melee attack, but instead of being adjacent to the figure, they can be up to 2 spaces away. So that's basically Imperial Assault. Get gaming, have fun, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.